For 40 years, I kept a light that nothing ever came to. That was the work, and I want to be plain about it before I tell you the rest, because the rest is hard to believe, and I will not have you thinking I was anyone special. I was not. I was a relay keeper on Carriage Ridge, which is a long, bald spine of black rock standing up out of the highlands like the back of something that drowned a long time ago and never finished sinking. The company put a beacon mast there before I was born, and a weather glass, and a lamp the size of a rain barrel, and a stone house with one stove and 2 windows, and every 20-some years they sent up a man to keep all of it lit and logged. I was the 3rd such man. I expect I will be the last, the way the company runs things now, but that is not my concern any longer. The light was for the skyroad. You have likely never heard the word, unless you grew up under it the way I did. The skyroad is a river of wind that runs along the top of the world, a high fast current of cold air that the drakes ride twice a year, north in the warm season and south before the freeze, the whole great migration of them pouring along that current like water finding the only channel cut for it. They had been doing it longer than there were men to watch, longer than there were names for anything. The relay company did not care about the drakes. The company cared that the skyroad was also the only safe air lane through the mountains for the supply skiffs and the ore haulers, and that a skiff in a whiteout will fly straight into Carriage Ridge and be gone, men and cargo both, unless there is a light on the spine to say here is the rock, go around. So I kept the light. I logged the wind. I trimmed the lamp and I greased the mast and I wrote down the pressure 4 times a day in a book no one would ever read. And the skiffs went around the rock, and nothing landed, and nothing stopped, and the years went by. I do not want to make it sound like grief. It was not grief. It was just the shape of the life. A man gets used to being a thing that other things pass. The skiffs passed, going somewhere. The seasons passed. And twice a year, autumn and spring, the migration passed, and that was the only part of it I would have called beautiful if I had been the kind of man to use the word out loud. You would hear them before you saw them. A sound that was not quite thunder and not quite the sea. A low pouring roar that came up over the northern shoulder of the ridge and grew until the windows hummed in their frames. And then they would come over the top of the world in a column you could not see the end of. Thousands of them. Wings the color of slate in storm and old iron, riding the cold river south. They flew so high most years that they were only shapes, a long smoke of bodies drawn out across the whole sky. But on a clear morning with the sun low you could see them true, the great ones leading with wings that took the light like beaten metal and the young ones tucked into the draft behind, and the whole vast company of them moving as one thing, one will. One current of living weight going where it had always gone. I would stand out on the spine in the cold and watch them come and watch them go, and when the last of them had crossed the southern shoulder and the sound had drained back out of the windows, the silence afterward was the loudest thing in my life. I had watched that migration go over me every autumn for 40 years. It had never once come down. Why would it? There was nothing on the rock for it. There was a light and an old man and a book no one read. I tell you all of this so you understand what kind of nothing I was. The autumn the storm came, and one of them fell. It was a bad season for weather. The pressure had been dropping for 3 days, the weather glass low and ugly, and I had logged it and battened the shutters and brought the goats into the lee shed and waited the way you wait when the mountains are deciding what to do to you. The migration was due. I could feel it the way you feel a train before you hear it. And then the storm came up the valley faster than the glass had promised, a black wall of it with the snow turning sideways in the wind, and the migration came up the other shoulder at the same time, and the 2 of them met over Carriage Ridge in the dark. I have seen the skyroad in foul weather before. The drakes are built for it. The storm is their element more than mine ever was. They ride the worst of it the way a fish rides a flood. But that night the storm was wrong, the wind shearing and turning back on itself, and somewhere in the black above the ridge the column broke. I did not see it happen. I only heard it over the roar of the storm, a sound I will not forget, a high cry, Not like the great pouring roar of the flight, but small and sharp and torn. The sound of something young that has lost the current and cannot find it again. And then a thud against the mast that shook the guy wires in the stone, and a scrabble, and then nothing but the storm. I did not go out that night. I want to be honest about that too. I told myself there was no use, that whatever had struck the mast was 40 feet up and gone over the south face into the dark, that a man who went out onto the spine in that wind would not come back, that it was none of my affair. All of that was true. I lay in the cot with the stove ticking and the storm screaming on the rock, and I told myself it was none of my affair, and I did not sleep. In the gray of the morning, the storm had blown itself out and left the world scoured and white and silent, and I went out to check the mast for damage, and I found it. It had not gone over the south face. It had come down in the scree on the lee side, half buried, one wing fouled in the lower guy wire where it must have caught and torn loose and dropped. I had thought from the sound that it would be one of the great ones. It was not. It was a fledgling, a year old at the most, no bigger than one of my goats, and it lay in the snow with its torn wing splayed at an angle no living wing should make, and its sides going fast and shallow, and a thin crust of ice already formed along its flank where the snow had melted on it and frozen again in the night. I had never been close to one. In 40 years of watching them cross the top of the world, I had never once stood within reach of a drake, and I stood over this one now in the new snow, and I will tell you it did not look like the metal shapes I had watched in the high light. It looked like an animal that was dying. The scales were not iron. They were a soft mottled gray going green at the edges, dull with cold, and along the spine they were no bigger than a thumbnail and worn smooth like river stones. The head was long and narrow with a high bony crest laid flat, and the eyes, it opened one eye as I came near, a deep amber slit with a black bar down the center of it. The eye was full of the particular terror of a young thing that knows it is hurt and is too cold to run. The torn wing was the worst of it. The thin skin of it, stretched between the long finger bones the way a bat's is but vast, that skin was split clean along one whole panel, and the wing arm itself sat wrong in the shoulder, and there was blood gone black and frozen down its side. Wild drake, a protected animal by the company's own posted law, and a dangerous one. Even a fledgling has claws that will open a man to the bone and a bite that will take a hand off, and I had been warned my whole working life to keep clear of them. The sensible thing, the thing the law and the company and 40 years of solitary good sense all told me to do, was to log it and leave it and let the cold finish what the storm had started. It would be dead by midday. That was the plain truth of it. I stood there in the snow with my breath smoking, and I looked at the one amber eye looking back at me, and I could not do it. I am not going to pretend it was kindness, exactly, or courage, or anything you could put a clean word to. It was only that I had watched that great company cross over me twice a year for 40 years and never come down, and here at last one of them had come down, and it was small and broken and afraid, and I was the only thing on the whole ridge that could do anything at all about that. A man gets one chance sometimes to not be a thing the world passes. I did not reason it out like that, standing there. I only knelt down in the snow, slow, with my hands open where it could see them, and I started talking to it the low, foolish way you talk to a hurt goat, and I began the long, careful work of getting it free of the guy wire and onto the sledge. It fought me at the first. Of course it did. It was wild and it was terrified, and it did not know that my hands meant anything but harm. When I got near the torn wing, it made that small torn cry again and snapped. And the bite took the sleeve off my coat and a long red line off my forearm with it, and I sat back in the snow and bled and waited and started talking again. It took me the better part of the morning. By the end of it, I was soaked through and shaking with cold, and there was more of my blood on the snow than I liked. But I had it on the sledge with my coat over it, and the bad wing bound flat against its side with my belt and a length of cord, and I dragged it down off the spine and in through the low door of the stone house, and laid it on the floor by the stove, and I shut the door against the cold, and I sat down on the floor beside it because my legs would not hold me up any longer, and that is how it began. I did not name it for a long while. You do not name a thing you expect to bury. The first 3 days I expected to bury it every morning. It would not eat. It lay by the stove and breathed too fast and watched me with the one amber eye, and when I came near it tried to drag itself away from me into the corner, and the bad wing left a smear of dark blood on the stone. And I thought, this is foolishness. You have brought a dying wild thing into your house to die slower and in worse company than it would have died on the rock. I cleaned the torn wing as best I could with hot water and the goat salve I kept for the udders, and I set the wing arm back into the shoulder the way you set a goat's leg, which made it scream and made me sick, and I splinted it with 2 of the lamp cleaning rods and more cord, and I did not think any of it would matter. On the 4th day it ate. I had been leaving food near it and taking it away again, raw scraps off the goats and the dried fish from the supply tins, and on the 4th day I came in from the lamp and the fish was gone, and the amber eye watched me put down more, and after a long while with me sitting very still across the room, it stretched out its long neck and took the fish off the stone and ate it, watching me the whole time. Then it ate the rest. Then it slept, properly slept, the breathing slowing and going deep, and for the first time the bony crest came up off its skull a little, half raised, the way I would learn it held its crest when it was not afraid. I will not give you every day of that winter. There were a great many of them and most were the same. The lamp, the windlog, the goats, the long, slow work of teaching a wild thing that a man's hands could be trusted. But I will tell you that somewhere in there I named it, and the name I gave it was Tatter, for the wing, and the day I caught myself saying the name out loud to it across the room was the day I understood I had stopped expecting to bury it. It healed. That is the simplest way to say a thing that was not simple at all. The torn skin of the wing knit closed over the long weeks, puckered and ridged where the split had been, never again the smooth, clean panel it was born with but whole, holding. The wing arm healed too, but it healed crooked. I had said it as well as I knew how and I had said it wrong, or it had been hurt worse in the fall than I could mend with lamp rods and cord, and when at last I took the splint off, and Tatter unfolded that wing for the first time in the lamplight of the stone house, the arm of it sat low and stiff in the shoulder and would not come up level with the other. The wing opened. It would never again open all the way. I knew what that meant before Tatter did. I had watched the migration my whole life. I knew the way the great ones drove the column, the impossible power it took to ride that high cold river, the way even the young had to beat hard and constant to hold their place in the draft. A wing that would not open level was a wing that could lift a fledgling off the rock for a short hop and a glide down the lee of the ridge, and no more. It was a wing that would never carry Tatter back up onto the sky road when the migration came north in the spring. I knew that, and I did not say it out loud, because there is no one to say a thing like that to accept the thing it is true of, and Tatter could not understand my words, only my voice, and I did not want my voice to carry that. The inspector came in the deep of the winter, the once-a-season visit, the supply skiff dropping onto the spine in a clear cold spell with the new fuel and the new tins, and the company forms to be signed. His name was Voss, and he had made the run for 9 years, and he had no use for me and I had none for him, which suited us both. He came in stamping snow off his boots and saw Tatter by the stove. There was no hiding it. The house is one room, and his hand went to the sidearm on his hip and he said, "You cannot have that here." "It is hurt," I said. "It came down in the autumn storm. I am keeping it till the spring flight." "You cannot keep a drake," he said. "It is against the company law and it is against sense. They are dangerous and they are protected both, which means if it takes your arm off no one will come, and if you sell so much as a scale of it they will jail you." He looked at the splinted wing and the crooked set of it and he laughed, not kindly. "And that one will not fly again regardless. Look at it. You have nursed a cripple through a winter of your rations to put off the burying of it. Do the sensible thing, Holloway. Put it down and log it and have done. I will even do it for you if you have not the stomach." I said no. He looked at me a long moment, the way you look at a man you have decided is simple, and then he shrugged and got out his forms, and that was the end of it. He did not report me. I think he could not be bothered. He logged the fuel and the tins, and he signed his name, and he flew the empty skiff off the spine in the last of the light, and he never knew, I did not know it myself yet, that he had said the truest thing anyone would say to me that whole long year. You have nursed a cripple through a winter of your rations to put off the burying of it. He meant it as contempt, but it was only the truth, and the truth of it did not shame me the way he intended. It steadied me. Yes, I thought, after the skiff was gone and the silence had come back down on the rock. Yes, that is exactly what I have done, and I would do it again. I had split my rations to do it. I want that on the record, not for the credit of it, but because it is part of the true account. A keeper's winter tins are figured for one man and one man only, and a growing drake eats like a furnace, and by the turn of the deep cold I was hungry more days than not, and Tatter was not. I burned through my fuel ration, keeping the stone house warm enough for a creature meant to ride the high cold air, but not, I learned, meant to lie injured in it. And by the worst of the winter, I was sleeping in my coat to save the fuel for the part of the room where Tatter slept. None of that felt like sacrifice while I was doing it. It is only looking back that I can see the shape of what it cost, and even now I do not regret a tin of it. Because here is the thing that the inspector, for all his sense, did not understand. Somewhere in that long winter I stopped being a man keeping a dying animal alive, and I became, I do not have a better word for it, I became someone Tatter knew. The fear went out of the amber eyes by the new year. The crest rode high when I came in from the cold. Tatter learned the lamp, and would crane that long neck to watch me trim it through the window. Learned the goats, and would lie in the lee shed in the weak winter sun with them around it, not the least afraid. The goats and the drake all warming each other in the straw. Learned my step on the rock, and would be at the low door when I came down off the spine. And on the first mild day of the breaking winter, when the south face of the ridge caught the sun, and the snow began to weep off the black rock, Tatter came out of the house on its own for the first time, out into the open air, and stood on the spine in the wind with its crest streaming and its good wing half open, smelling the high cold smell of the world it had been born to. And I watched it from the lamp platform, and my chest hurt in a way I had not let it hurt in 40 years. That was when I began to teach it to fly. What of flying I could. We would go out to the long lee slope below the spine, the gentle one, and I would coax it to spread both wings, the good and the crooked, and run down the slope into the wind. And on the third day it caught the air for a moment, only a moment, a few feet of true lift before the crooked wing failed and dropped it stumbling into the heather. And it lay there and looked up at me with the wind in its crest, and made a sound I had never heard it make before. A low rolling chirr that I came to understand was the closest thing a drake has to joy. We did that every mild day. It learned to hop and glide the lee of the ridge, to ride the updraft off the south face for a slow falling circle and land. It learned the small flying that a broken wing allows, and every day it tried for more than that, tried to drive itself up off the rock the way its blood was telling it to, and every day the crooked wing would not answer, and it would come down, and I would have to look at it knowing what was coming in the spring and unable to say it. The great shapes began to come at night before I understood what they were. The first time I thought it was a dream, or the start of the spring flight come early. I woke deep in the night to the low pouring roar I knew from 40 autumns, but smaller near, and I lay in the cot and felt the air move and the windows hum, and I got up and went out onto the spine in my coat into the black, and there was nothing to see, only the cold and the stars wheeling and the wind. But the wind had a sound in it that was not the wind. High up, very high, something was circling the light. I could feel the great slow beat of it more than hear it, a vast unhurried pressure of wings turning above the beacon in the dark, around and around, and then it was gone north, the way the autumn flight had gone south. Tatter had been awake the whole time. When I came back in, the crest was flat and the amber eyes were wide and fixed on the dark window, and the long body was trembling, and Tatter made the small torn cry I had not heard since the morning I found it in the scree. It happened again 4 nights later, and again the week after that, the great shapes coming out of the north in the deep dark to circle the light and go. And the third time, near dawn, with the sky going gray, I saw one of them. It came lower than the others, low enough that against the lightening sky I saw the true size of it for the first time at close range, and it was nothing like Tatter, nothing like the soft mottled gray fledgling asleep by my stove. It was vast. The wings of it spanned wider than my whole house, and they were the iron and storm I had watched in the high light all my life, and the head of it was a long blade of bone with a crest that stood up like a crown of black spines, and as it banked over the beacon it turned that head and looked down. I swear to you it looked down, with one great eye, an eye the size of a dinner plate and the deep gold of a forge. It looked down at the stone house where the lamp burned, and then it beat once. A single stroke that flattened the heather all down the slope, and was gone up into the gray. I understood then what was happening, and the understanding put a cold in me that the stove could not touch. The flight had not lost a fledgling in the storm and flown on and forgotten it. The flight had marked where one of its young went down, and all winter on their scouting passes along the edges of the skyroad, the great ones had been coming back to the place, circling the light, smelling the rock, and finding, every time, the scent of their lost young still alive, and the scent of a man and a splint, and a stone house with the young thing kept inside it. They did not know I had pulled Tatter from the guy wire half frozen and split my rations through a winter to keep it breathing. How could they know that? They knew only what it would look like to any creature that loves its young and finds one of them taken and caged by a thing with hands. They knew a man had their fledgling, and the spring flight was coming north up the skyroad, the whole great company of them, and when it came, it would come to the light. I did not sleep much, those last weeks of the winter. I would lie awake and listen for the great wings and think about the eye the size of a dinner plate looking down at my house, and I understood with a cold clarity that there was nothing I could say to it. I had no words a drake would know. I could not explain the salve or the splint or the rations or 40 years of keeping a light for a sky that never came down. When the flight came, it would see a cripple of its own blood and the man who had it, and it would do what any great power does when it finds the small and the loved in the hands of the strange. And there was no skiff to call, and no inspector due, and nowhere on the bald black spine of Carrot's Ridge for an old man to hide from the whole weight of the sky come down to take back its own. I thought about letting Tatter go, driving it off down the valley, away from the ridge before the flight came, so that when the sky descended on the light there would be nothing here but a man and a lamp, and they would see they were wrong and go. I went so far as to open the low door one gray morning and stand aside from it and tell Tatter to go on, get clear of here. And Tatter came to the door and looked out at the cold and looked up at me with the crest half raised and the amber eyes steady, and did not go. It put its long head against my chest the way it had taken to doing, a great careful weight and breathed, and would not go, and I shut the door against the cold and sat down on the floor with my arm around its neck, and I gave it up. We would meet whatever came together. There was nothing else left to do. The flight came on a clear morning at the very end of the cold, with the sun low and gold over the eastern ranges and the wind out of the north, the way it always came. I heard it first, the way I always had, the low pouring roar coming up over the northern shoulder of the ridge, and I went out onto the spine with my heart going, and Tatter came out behind me, and we stood there together on the black rock and watched the top of the world fill up with them. They came in their thousands, the whole great company drawn out across the sky, riding the high cold river north, and then, as I had known and dreaded they would, the head of the column bent. It came down out of the high air. The whole vast current of them tilted and dropped toward Carrot's Ridge, toward the light, toward us, the great ones leading, and the roar of them grew until the windows of the house behind me shattered in their frames, and I could not hear my own voice, and the wind of their coming knocked me to my knees on the rock. They came down on the ridge hunting a thief. I have no doubt of that, none, because I felt it. The air went hot and dry with it. with the rage of a great power that has found its young taken, and the leading edge of them flared their wings to break, and the spine of Karet's ridge filled up with drakes the size of skiffs, the size of houses, landing all down the rock with claws that scored the black stone, and crests up like crowns of spears, and the long blade heads swinging low and the gold forge eyes finding the splint marks still faint on Tatter's healing wing. Finding the stone house, finding me on my knees on the rock with my torn coat and my old hands open and nothing at all to say. The greatest of them came down last and came down before me. I knew her for the leader the way you know whether. She was the one the rest had made room for, vast even among the vast, her wings the dark of a coming storm and her crest the high black crown I had seen against the dawn. And she folded those wings and lowered that great head until the forge eye the size of a dinner plate was level with my face, a body length away, and the heat of her breath rolled over me, and I understood that I was about to die. And I found that I was not afraid the way I had thought I would be. I was only sorry I could not make her understand. I knelt there and looked into that golden eye, and I did the only thing left to me, which was to not look away, and to say low, the way I had said it to the fledgling in the scree a whole winter ago, "It is all right. It is all right. I kept him safe. I kept him for you." She could not understand the words, but Tatter moved. While I knelt there under the matriarch's eye, Tatter came down off the spine and crossed the rock to me, away from the whole great company of its own blood, toward the man, and it pressed its long head against my chest the way it had all the long winter, and it made the low rolling chirr it made when it was glad, and it turned with its head still against me and looked up at the matriarch, and I felt the whole ridge go still. I do not know all of what passed between them in that stillness. I am a man. I do not have the sense to read it, but I will tell you what I saw, and you may make of it what you can. I saw the matriarch's great head come closer, slow, and her nostrils work over the both of us, over Tatter and over me, and I saw her read the salve smell and the goat smell and the smell of the stone house and the old healed scar of the splint and the way her fledgling leaned into the hands that had bound it. I saw the long blade head turn and look past us at the broken windows of the house, and at the lamp on its platform still burning faint in the morning, and at the spine of the rock where the heather lay flattened, and I saw, I would swear it on whatever you like, I saw her understand. The heat went out of the air. The rage drained off the ridge the way the storm had drained out of the windows on the night Tatter fell, all at once, and what came down in its place was a silence so deep and so vast, the silence of the whole sky come to rest on the rock, that I have not had words equal to it in all the years since. She did not bow to me, and I am glad of it because I would not have known where to put myself if she had, and I am only an old keeper and bowing is not a thing the sky should do to the likes of me. She did something else. She lowered her great head all the way to the rock before her young, and she breathed a long warm breath, out of that furnace of a body, that rolled over Tatter and over me both, warm as the stove in the deep of winter, warm as a thing being welcomed home, and Tatter lifted its head off my chest and answered her, a sound from down in its chest that I had never heard it make, and all down the ridge the great company answered too. A low rolling note out of 1,000 throats that I felt in the rock under my knees and in the bones of my chest, and I understood that the lost young had been found, and that the finding was not a taking, and that I was not, after all, going to die on the black rock that morning. Then came the hard part, and it is the part I have thought about every day since, and the part that is the true heart of what I have to tell. The flight could not stay. The skyroad waits for nothing. The high cold river was running north and the season was turning, and the whole great company had to ride it on to wherever it was the migration went, that I had watched leave me behind twice a year for 40 years. And Tatter was of the flight. Tatter's blood was the flight. I had seen it all winter, the way the young thing strained up off the lee slope trying to drive itself into the high air, the way the migration pull had woken in it the moment the column bent down out of the sky. It wanted to go. I saw it want to go. It stood there on the rock between me and its mother and its own kind, with the whole sky calling it north, and it wanted to go, and it could not. the crooked wing would not carry it up onto the sky road. It would lift Tatter off the rock for a hop and a glide down the lee, and no higher and no farther, not in 1,000 tries. I had known that since the day I took the splint off. I knew it now, watching the want in it, and I knew the cruelty of it, that the flight had come down and found its young alive only to leave it behind on the rock because it could not fly the road. And I found that I knew that cruelty in my own bones, better than I had ever wanted to. I had stood on that ridge and watched the sky go north without me twice a year for 40 years. I knew exactly what it is to be grounded while the world flies on. I knew it so well that I could not bear to see it done to Tatter, and there was not one single thing I could do about it, and that, I think, the helplessness of it, the old keeper on his knees who could mend a wing wrong but could not give it back the high air, that I think was the thing the matriarch saw last when she looked at me. Not the salve, not the rations, the grief. She saw an old man who understood in his own small grounded life exactly what it was to be left, and who could not bear to watch it happen to the thing he loved. I do not know what made her do what she did then. The Drakes had never done it before in all the ages of the migration. I have learned that much since, from those who study them, that it was a thing without precedent. Perhaps it was the leaning of her young into a man's hands. Perhaps it was 40 years of a light kept on a rock for a sky that never came down. Perhaps the great old powers of the world can learn a mercy they did not have, if something small enough and stubborn enough shows it to them first. I cannot tell you. I can only tell you what they did. The matriarch raised her head and gave a call I had not heard, a high, clear single note, and the flight answered and rose all at once, the whole great company lifting off Kerech Ridge in a thunder that pressed me flat to the rock, but they did not go north. They went up, and they wheeled, and they formed above the ridge into a thing I had never seen the migration do, a great slow turning column with a hollow heart to it, a column of beating wings shaped like a funnel with the still air down the center of it, the whole flight beating in concert to make a rising river of their own warm wind. And the matriarch came back down to the rock and put her head against Tatter, gently, the way Tatter had put its head against me, and nudged it toward the slope, toward the lee, toward the place we had practiced the small flying all the breaking winter. I understood it the moment Tatter spread its wings. They were going to carry it. The broken wing could not climb the high cold river on its own, but it did not have to. The flight had made a wind for it, a warm rising column down the heart of the column, gentle enough that even a crooked wing could ride it, and all Tatter had to do was open both wings and let its own kind lift it. The whole great company of the sky had turned itself into a thing that could carry the one of them that could not climb. Tatter ran down the lee slope into the wind the way we had practiced 100 times, and spread the good wing and the crooked one, and caught the air, and this time the air caught it back, the warm rising river the flight had made, and it did not fall. It rose. It went up off the rock and up into the hollow heart of the turning column, wobbling and clumsy and climbing into the warm wind of 1,000 wings, up where I had watched the young ride in the draft of the great ones every autumn of my life, and the flight folded itself around it and lifted it, and the matriarch rose last, beneath it, holding the warm column steady under her young, and the whole vast company of them turned at last to the north and the high cold road, carrying the broken one in the heart of them, and went. I stood on the spine of Kerech Ridge in the gold morning, with the wind of their going in my torn coat, and I watched the migration cross over me the way it had crossed over me for 40 years, north up the sky road, the great ones leading and the warm hollow heart of the column carrying the one that could not climb, and I watched until they were only a long smoke of bodies drawn out across the top of the world, and then only a darkness against the high light, and then gone over the northern shoulder of the ridge. And then nothing, and the silence came down on the rock the way it always did. But it was not the same silence. I want to be very clear about that because it is the whole of what I have to say. For 40 years the silence after the migration had been the loudest and the emptiest thing in my life, the sky gone north without me, the rock and the old man and the book no one read. This silence was full. The sky had come down to my rock. The sky had looked into my old face with an eye the size of a dinner plate and breathed a welcome over me warm as my own stove, and learned, from a man and a fledgling, a mercy it had not had in all its ages, that the broken can be carried, if their own will only make the wind for them, and gone north carrying its young because of it. I had not been past. For one morning in 40 years, I had not been the thing the world flies over. I had been the rock the sky came down to. They came back in the autumn. I half thought they would not. I told myself not to wait on it, an old man with broken windows and a hungry winter behind him, not to make a fool of his own heart waiting on the sky. But the autumn turned and the pressure dropped, and I heard the low pouring roar come up over the northern shoulder, and I went out onto the spine, and the head of the great column bent down out of the high air toward the light the way it had in the spring, and came down on Carrick's Ridge. And there, in the leading edge of them, riding low and clumsy on a crooked wing in the warm draught the great ones made for it, came Tatter, grown half again as big as I had last seen it. And it came down off the column to the rock and crossed to me, and put its great head against my chest, and made the low rolling chirr that is the closest thing a drake has to joy. And I put my arms as far around its neck as they would go, which was not nearly far enough any more, and I was not ashamed of the sounds I made. They have come every season since. Autumn and spring, the whole storm-wing bends the ancient road down out of the high air to cross low over the windreach light, and Tatter comes down to the rock first, and stays the day, and the great company rests on the spine and the lee slopes. The iron and the storm of them folded all down my black ridge, and the matriarch, the high gale, I have learned the studiers call her, Marina among themselves, in the way they have of nomming, which I will not pretend to understand. The matriarch lies in the sun by the broken and mended windows of the stone house, and watches me trim the lamp, the way Tatter used to. The company that comes to write all this down in their books, now that the world knows the storm-wing bends its road for an old relay keeper, they ask me how I trained a wild drake and won the regard of the migration, and they do not like my answer, because it is no answer at all. I did not train anything. I did not win anything. I pulled a half-frozen fledgling off a guy wire because it was the only thing on the rock that could, and I split my tins, and I kept it warm, and I set its wing wrong, and I loved it, and the sky noticed. That is the whole of it. There is no skill in it for them to write down. The relay company wanted to move me after. There was talk of a posting somewhere kinder, a man my age, the cold, the broken windows. I told them no. I will keep the windreach light on Carrick's Ridge until I cannot stand to trim it, and then I expect I will lie down in the sun by the windows next to the high gale, and that will be that, and they may send up a fourth keeper or they may let the light go out, but the sky will still bend its road over this rock, because the sky remembers things longer than the company keeps records. I had kept a light for 40 years so that things passing in the dark would know the world was still there. I never once thought the world might turn, some cold spring morning, and keep a light for me.